Next up, I'd like to welcome Kamran to the stage. He has a lot to share with us about hemp and FDA, which is really not something I don't know very much about, and it's something that's changing every day. So Kamran, come on up, and I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll get your slides up.
Thank you so much for welcoming me to speak. I've always wanted to be a talk show host, so I really look forward to the questions we have. The prior presentations were fantastic. I think the work that Adam's doing sounds really important, and that's a really cogent argument he's making. And thanks to Kristen as well for laying that out for us. It is a couple comments. If you get your hemp through Idaho, don't stop. Keep going through Wyoming and keeping the speed limit, because that map, even though it has a purple designation, the laws in Wyoming say hemp is lawful, hemp extracts are lawful. The law enforcement's not exactly listening to that. They're actually kind of almost setting up checkpoints at way stations, and it seems like they're using canine alerts to stop these hemp trucks. And another thing about the field testing is that the field testing usually does not have a level of accuracy needed to properly test for the legal standard, which is the Delta 9 THC content. They'll often just test for the mere presence of cannabinoids. So basically any cannabis compound that that comes through on that test will show, hey, this is cannabis, and that'll result in an arrest or confiscation, or and then just one final comment on the testing issue, and I'll get into this a little bit as far as the Delta 9 THC content and how that relates to extracts. It's actually not clear. It's kind of an open question of law because the Farm Bill designates by dry weight. Then there's no designation as far as after hemp is processed into extracts, what that threshold is. We're going by 0.3 because we don't have any other information to indicate otherwise, and the safest thing is to keep the THC concentrations below 0.3%, Delta 9 THC. So I thought of 3 questions when coming up with this presentation I kind of wanted to answer. So, and being, I appreciate Beth designating me as an expert on the FDA. Being an expert on FDA stuff right now is a bit nebulous. So I wanted to address what do we know for sure. I want to address what kind of the industry wants, and this is information that I'm getting from clients that we speak to every day. So I work with Rod Kight, who's based out of North Carolina. And he's one of the nation's premier hemp attorneys. I'll show you his profile later. I'm going to do a shameless plug for our law firm at the end, so please excuse that. But I get a lot of feedback on a daily basis from people calling, asking for our services, and there's such a lack of consistency of application of laws. So what does the industry want? And then I'm going to try my best to make a prediction as to what might happen. So we'll start with the 2018 approval of a drug called Epidiolex. This was a drug produced by GW Pharmaceuticals to treat a rare form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. I was approved for that and one other application, I think, as well, another epilepsy disease. And that's one of only 2 cannabinoid compounds. There's Marinol, which is also approved. So a key feature of that approval was that it moved cannabidiol. So CBD had never been on the drug schedule prior to this FDA approval of Epidiolex. It had always been on Schedule 1 because cannabis was Schedule 1 narcotic. So this was kind of, in a way, a double-edged sword because we saw some willingness by the DEA to reschedule cannabinoid compound, but it also placed CBD on the drug schedules by name for the first time. We're kind of mixed feelings about that. So as you can see up here, so in early 2018, there was the investigational new drug application, and that triggered, here, go to the next slide here, that triggered what's called the drug exclusion rule. And that says that if an INDA has been applied for and made public, then that article cannot be labeled or marketed as a dietary supplement. And I include a citation to the section of the Code of Federal Regulations here. United States Code 2201 FF3B has an exception. It says if the substance was marketed as a dietary supplement or as a conventional food before the drug was approved or before the new drug investigations were authorized as applicable, then it can't. So that does not apply when you have a product in the food supply containing a compound that was later FDA approved. You can't just, this is saying like you can't just remove that out of the food supply. And notice this at the bottom here. Oops, this is a touchscreen too. FDA regulation of topicals less stringent. I can talk a little bit more about that later. But here's why we disagree with that FDA position. So hemp has been part of the food supply for decades prior to the INDA for Epidiolex. And there was a case in I think decided in '94 called Hemp Industries Association versus the DA, and this was regarding import of foreign hemp for mature stocks. So even within the CSA definition of marijuana, there is an exception for the mature stocks of the cannabis plant. There's an exception within the exception that says that oils from the mature stocks don't qualify for the exception. I mean, when you read regulations and statutes all the time, just say it clearly, please. In things like, so hemp seed and hemp fiber and hemp hurd all probably contained small amounts of CBD. CBD is a new molecule that has only been recognized recently as part of the broad range of potentially effective cannabinoid compounds. So Epidiolex contained CBD isolate from marijuana. So this is the first distinction that we're making, is that CBD isolate and Epidiolex is derived from marijuana, whereas CBD from hemp is part of a CSA exemption. So the CSA exemption under the 2018 Farm Bill was expanded to include extracts. So our argument is that extracts from lawful hemp are also lawful, and extracts from unlawful marijuana are themselves unlawful, and we're differentiating CBD from hemp from CBD from marijuana. And then there's a second distinction here. So you're dealing with an isolated compound versus a natural extract containing the full range of phytonutrients and cannabinoids, including CBD. And there's precedent for this case. Another case, I believe, spearheaded by Hemp Industries Association, go lawyers, regarding red rice yeast. So there was a cholesterol statin drug that was approved in earlier mid-90s from red rice yeast. Now, red rice yeast is available in health food stores in a powder form and supplement form. And once the FDA approved that drug, they started to try and pull all the red rice yeast products off the shelves. And health food stores said, wait a minute, we've been selling this for years, and people went into the FDA Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and saw the exemption I talked about, and they won that case. And so you can still buy red rice yeast in the stores today. So we're applying, and that was like where this term full spectrum plant extract kind of first came from, and we're applying that to hemp and saying this is essentially the same situation. You have hemp products that have been edible hemp products that have been available for decades and decades, and they've contained small amounts of CBD, and that they should continue to be able to be sold, especially since we now have this federal CSA exemption. Okay, what we don't disagree with is that the FDA does not allow improper health claims about non-FDA approved substances. So you cannot make any comments about the capacity of non-FDA approved articles to diagnose, treat, mitigate, cure, or prevent a disease. And the FDA has spoken several times on this issue. The FDA likes to issue long statements without really saying anything and without changing any substantive policy. So outgoing Commissioner Scott Gottlieb on April 2nd issued his final statement as commissioner before stepping down, and addressed the issue of CBD in food products, and had indicated that one of the big concerns is that since there's such a lack of oversight and a lack of standards, that a lot of products are getting to market not containing the amount of CBD that they are labeled to have, or not containing any CBD at all, or containing other contaminants and things that are just there's no standardized regulations and no testing protocols that companies must follow. So they said that they're worried about that, and they're also worried about people seeking non-FDA approved remedies for diseases or ailments when they're without fully exploring all the FDA approved remedies already. So they've started issuing warning letters again, and this gets back to that enforcement issue that the FDA just has not enforced this policy at all. The actual wording of their policies is adding CBD isolate to ingestible products violates the FDA Act. They don't specifically say much about topicals and have seemed to kind of leave those products mostly alone. You still can't make health claims about topicals, and we're just recommending now not, and again, this is not legal advice. I think that's a good caveat, but this is as a general advice here. Just not mentioning any diseases whatsoever. So instead of saying something like this product may help with cure insomnia, we would say this product might help. It interacts with the body's natural endocannabinoid system to promote restful sleep. Or instead of this product can address arthritis, this product may help promote healthy joints. So this is some of the advertising language that we're seeing being used to kind of avoid running afoul of the FDA Act. So the FDA will be holding a May 31st public hearing at the White Oak Room in Maryland at their headquarters, and we're currently in an open comment session. So this is a real opportunity for the industry to speak and to give FDA information. So FDA is seeking industry feedback on how, and you'll see these are just 3 examples. This is directly from the FDA website. So they want to know about maximum dosage, they want to know about safe use of cannabis and how it can be added to food products and analytical testing and things like that. And the FDA has acknowledged, Scott Gottlieb, former commissioner, has acknowledged on several occasions, the same day that the Farm Bill came out, FDA released a statement, and then again on April 2nd, and both times we're saying, we recognize the CSA exemption for hemp and hemp extracts. But the other thing I want to mention is just that the FDA does not regulate hemp flower or raw hemp. They're really focused on CBD, so I don't think I'm ignoring that issue. It's just that they just kind of don't regulate raw hemp flower until it's processed into kind of a form that would be ingestible. They've acknowledged the CSA exemption for hemp, and they have also acknowledged that there are legal pathways to market for hemp and hemp extracted products. And this is a link here I've just kind of included, and you can feel free to contact me after if you want some direction on resources here. But this is really important. I think to have a group of cultivators in the room and people who are directly involved in this industry to just go online and write a public comment to the FDA. If I were cynical, I would say that the FDA might just be doing this as a kind of a show, and that there's some big moneyed interests behind keeping CBD on federally kind of more limited in terms of requiring prescription for things like Dravet syndrome and epilepsy. And you definitely have in instances of we have seen instances of industry agency capture before. I'm not saying I'm that cynical, but there's definitely interests at play here to keep broad scale sale of CBD kind of more limited. So the new FDA regime, Ned Sharpless, we don't know much about him. We'll wait and see. He mentioned CBD just once in his opening statement posted on the FDA website. He was really proud of the FDA, the reboot of the website, which, to be honest, is great because it does look better. But if that's his big priority, then I don't know where we're going to stand. Yeah, Gottlieb was more focused on the vaping epidemic. So we have some information from some pretty important organizations, worldwide organizations. World Health Organization conducted 2 comprehensive reviews of CBD and concluded that this is just the kicker here. There is no justification for CBD to be included in the anti-drug treatments. And they also said, that there's no, they didn't find any potential for dependence or psychoactive response at any dose. So those are some pretty big findings. Found potential effectiveness in many therapeutic applications. So this is kind of from the FDA Act. The purpose of the FDA Act is so FDA is responsible for protecting public health by ensuring safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, and ensuring safety of the nation's food supply and things like that. So the FDA, the WHO report should be informative of this goal. So we kind of get now to our second question, which is what does the industry want? Well, the dream scenario would be to get, pardon the pun here, but to have a GRAS certification, generally recognized as safe, and that is a designation that the FDA places on a variety of things when they just say, hey, this is a non-harmful ingredient and is approved for use in food and dietary supplements and things like that. So that's the dream scenario. That's if we're thinking that the FDA is really going to listen to the industry and take this feedback seriously, and then implement rules. So while I have the summary timeline up here, I'll talk about the enforcement and the FDA, the way that FDA regulations come about. So everything that the FDA said so far on CBD is essentially unofficial positions. So that prohibition on adding CBD isolate to ingestible products first appeared on an FAQ page on the FDA website, and then has since been reiterated in 2 comments made by the commissioner. But it has never gone through what is called a notice and comment rulemaking process. So that is under the Administrative Procedures Act, the requirement for the FDA to issue regulations. Now, once those regulations are issued, it becomes law. It has essentially the same weight as a federal statute, but it has to go through this specific process. So that's, I think, one of the main reasons why FDA has not really enforced is because they've not gone through that process yet. So May 31st, bottom of this timeline here, it's likely that will be the, and here I've got some, oops. Computer, Beth. The touchscreen, I like that.
It's cool when you use it first, like what the hell.
Yeah. So it's likely that this FDA public hearing. If we look at the history of how FDA makes regulations, this would be the first step in them engaging in this notice and comment rulemaking process. So the FDA would generally issue notice of proposed rulemaking. So this would be after this public hearing. Once they have all this information back, they would issue a notice of proposed rulemaking. They would issue these proposed rules and give another window for the industry to talk back, and then issue final rules. And then we'd have, hopefully at that point, we would have clarity in the way that we want, which is not, okay, we're eliminating all CBD, et cetera. We would hope to get a GRAS certification or something like that. So FDA position on official rule, this open comment will be the first opportunity, first step in the notice of comment rulemaking process. And the notice of comment is, the public feedback is open until July 2nd, so you don't have to get those comments in before the public hearing, and it's going to be live streamed, and I encourage you again to put input and pay attention to that. As we talked about, as the former presenters talked about, the 2018 subsection G hemp will be grown in 2020. if those regulations can get off the ground, USDA might speak on some of the testing issues as well. And then does CBD extract still have to contain less than 0.3% delta-9 THC? So as I kind of already talked about, specifically, we don't know. There's no specific thing that says that yes, it does, but we're operating under the assumption that that's the safest route to go. No disease claims, and then must be products. Any product containing CBD has to come from lawful hemp grown under a lawful federal program. The pilot programs are still operational, and those, despite the troubling Idaho precedent things they're trying to do, we think that's a pretty disingenuous argument to say that an expansion of the legal status of hemp serves to eliminate a program that they specifically said doesn't get eliminated until a year after the USDA issues regulations. So. And then, this is really important and something that's touched on a little bit. Enforcement at the state level by boards of health, pharmacy, and agriculture. So since the FDA has not been enforcing these policies, we've seen state and local boards of health, departments of agriculture, boards of pharmacy issue things like warning letters and do some compliance reviews. It's really ironic in a state like California that has had medical marijuana since 1995 and now has recreational marijuana that they don't have a pilot program for hemp. There's no hemp being grown in California. The California Board of Public Health has actually issued a statement, this was about a year ago, that marijuana edibles are okay, but edibles containing CBD from hemp are not. So, you just kind of look at that and think, where is that priority coming from? And there's got to be a lot of lobbying going on in that state to, kind of really push the marijuana industry forward, and there's not as much weight behind hemp. But I'm wondering why. I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. But that's kind of what we currently have. And then in North Carolina as well, North Carolina, where our law firm is based, is actually one of the more hemp-friendly states in the country. They were early adopter pilot program, have grown thousands of acres of hemp, and there are hemp and CBD stores all around Nashville and other cities in North Carolina. But there was a warning letters that started getting passed around a few months ago about CBD isolate and ingestible products, and then the Department of Agriculture has started to send out agents for compliance reviews and spot reviews, and they haven't confiscated products or sent any law enforcement agents in. They're wanting to, I think, get information and figure out what kind of products are showing up and then advising people, hey, pull the product to CBD isolate. This is kind of the advice we're giving. We're resting on our full and broad spectrum hemp argument, every week I learn something new about plant science and about hemp extracts, and there's now a category that people are calling full spectrum CBD distillate, which is a distill. It's basically the same as CBD isolate, but it contains certain amounts of terpenes and other compounds that would differentiate it from CBD isolate that is from marijuana, is in Epidiolex. We've got some client. I'm really inspired by the people who are passionate about this industry and working in this industry because I've had clients tell me that hemp is going to save the world, and that CBD is just kind of like this stopgap in that the industry developed to kind of make money from their products, and now that's there's a lot of questions about that, and they're pivoting. At a food conference, Northwest Food Show, this was a few weeks ago at the convention center. One of our clients was debuting a hemp terpene essential oil. And essential oils are regulated by the FDA to a much lesser extent than dietary supplements, foods, and drugs. So these can be used in things like soaps and just sold in little bottles. And I swear I took one of these hemp essential oils and I smelled and I was like, I want to wear this as a cologne. It smelled amazing, And so this is something that some of the hemp growers are starting to explore with really unique extraction methods and creating products that are not at all regulated or really not don't contain CBD but contain other compounds in the hemp plant. So our role as attorneys, I think, is threefold. One is obviously as advocates for our clients, that's most important. And two is as activists. I think that anybody working in the cannabis industry is an activist, regardless of what your role is. There is just a long-standing stigma against cannabis of any kind. And I know that the term cannabis has been used today to refer to marijuana. But we like to make that distinction that cannabis is an overarching category, and then marijuana is CSA prohibited. Hemp is not. So I think that there's just it's a minor thing, but this nomenclature becomes very important. And third is as educators, and this is kind of what we're doing today. And we keep a blog on our website and try to really keep track of all the developments. And our firm will be represented on the 31st at the White Oak Room. Rod Kight will be there, has signed up for a speaking slot, and hopefully we'll have a chance to represent our clients there. So here's how to reach us. I just threw my information up here for you. I've also put down some of my business cards there, and I think I opened okay, here we go. So this is our shameless plug. I would be remiss if I didn't put Rod's picture up here. I just feel really lucky. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever known or worked with, and I feel really lucky to be a part of Kight Law. And then I'll just tell you, a little bit of a personal story about how did I get into this industry. 2017, after taking the bar exam, I think a lot of people experience as needing a little bit of money. And a friend of mine was one of the first to get his ODA license in Oregon, and they had read the regulations themselves and applied for the license, got it, and then came across Rod's blog and called him, and so I was just on their farm cutting down hemp trees. I mean, they were trees, they were this tall, and they were purple, and they looked like pot, and that's one of the problems now, is it's becoming harder and harder to differentiate by the look of the plants, whether it's hemp or marijuana. They were operating with this small canogen that was sitting on blocks of cinder blocks, and it was a mess, and it was a fire hazard. And I said, guys, you got some issues here. And then my mind started to turn and think about what is the real need in this industry, and what does this gets back to our other question: what does the industry want? This industry wants accountability. I mean, this is not an industry right now where hemp cultivators are trying to do things clandestinely or trying to skirt federal regulations. They're trying to do everything by the book, and so it becomes extremely hard to do that when there's such inconsistency in application of all these laws and regulations. And you do have a lot of people who I think were operating in the black market for a long time and are trying to get on board. And so we're excited to see the way things are headed. Especially since the Farm Bill contained that expansion to include extracts under the CSA exemption, and I think that the other big piece. So the wording on testing in the Farm Bill is it directs departments of agriculture to develop testing protocols via post-decarboxylation or some other generally accepted method. That's the wording. So that could be anything. I mean, and there's currently, and this issue, I know somebody had mentioned about some of the high THC cannabis that might actually test below 0.3% delta 9 by dry weight because it hasn't been decarboxylated, right? So testing methods like high pressure liquid chromatography that does not use heat will be the most accurate in determining the delta 9 THC concentrations. What's happening is that there's a lot of gas chromatography and other field tests that are not properly testing THC or delta 9 THC. So what do we think will happen? Well, if I had a crystal ball, I'd say that the industry is going to respond, and there might be notice and comment happening, but I kind of see them dragging their feet for a while. I just think that the priority for this topic is while it's becoming more more pressure is being put on the FDA to move on this. I just think that there's not going to be a ton of opening until hemp is grown under the federal regulations next year, and we have maybe the USDA will speak on the testing issues but I think there was this kind of gold rush after the Farm Bill got passed, and people thought, okay, it's all open now. Well, the federal, first of all, the implementation of the Farm Bill takes about a year and a half. Repealed pilot programs and have a federal regulatory scheme, and then the state level is going to have to come along. So I think until, I don't think Adam left, but until we have federal hemp marijuana reform, we might not see a lot of movement on this issue, because there's always going to be a misidentification problem between raw hemp and raw and marijuana, and then between extracts, because it's really hard to determine the source of products once they're extracted. So I'll finish just by saying that there's things you can do as a hemp grower to protect yourself, and one is just for now making sure you have a Department of Agriculture registration, that you have certificates of analysis showing THC concentration delta 9 below 0.3, from either a state-sponsored lab, a private lab, or both. I know there was an issue recently. I read something about a lot of the testing facilities in Oregon were falsifying lab reports to actually show higher levels of THC, because that's what the consumers wanted. They want 25, 27%, and so they were kind of doctoring some of those lab reports. I'm not going to name any names. I don't know, but this is something I had read about, and so we're hoping that that kind of stuff obviously slows down, and we see some consistency. So having some reputable lab reports, and then just starting small, I think, and trying to keep it local for now. I mean, the interstate commerce thing is I think we're more apt to start. When we started out, we were more apt to kind of just go by the letter of the law, which is that protects interstate commerce. But since we're seeing all these state level enforcement stuff, and it's becoming harder to advise clients that it's 100% okay. So start small, keep it local, have your COA, have your registration, and be ready for a big change next year with federal regulations. So I'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
So as some of these genetics for hemp get into world-class growers, there's a craft hemp movement growing. Do you think that the regulations will include smokables?
So currently there are no regulations for smokables. FDA just hasn't said anything about hemp pre-rolls, things like that. I think the biggest problem is just if it looks like a duck, they're going to treat it like one. So if you have a joint and it's a pre-roll, and to prove that that's hemp and not marijuana, I mean, some states might be more willing to recognize that distinction. Others might not. You're entering into, I think, risky territory, but there's just not. It's by the letter of the law, it's federally legal. Hemp is exempt from CSA control. What was the other part of your question? Is that? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Given that you're the FDA expert, I'm wondering, on the list, they have a list of things
No. Anybody else?
I just want to say thanks for your presentation. These events are so valuable for advocates from prohibition states, Texas. I just got an update in the industrial farm bill passed through the Texas Senate.
Also, interestingly enough, the Texas Board of Health had made a statement on CBD recently that kind of seemed like they were moving towards being more accepting. So I think that's a positive development as well.
So I know Maine as a state banned CBD and edibles, correct? I think in February that was, do you see that being a regression that we're going to see from other states, or is that kind of isolated?
So I think that once hemp is grown under the federal regulations next year, that's when we might see some real movement on the FDA side. And most of the state level regulation has been enforcement of the FDA policy, non-policy that kind of hasn't been enforced. So when the FDA kind of makes a statement, hopefully shifting that towards a generally recognized as safe, or saying, hey, we're going to leave it to states to determine state boards of health, and we're not going to make a comment on it, then we might see them, moving away from that FDA policy. I think the concern, so for instance, the North Carolina started sending, warning letters when FDA wasn't sending warning letters at the state level at all. And I think what happens is that, you're starting to see CBD gummies, for instance, in convenience stores and things like that. And I bet that a kid came up to his mom with a package of gummies and said, "Oh, Mom, what are these? I want these." And she says, "What are these?" And they say, "Oh, contains cannabis? What is this?" And they call the Board of Health, and then so this is kind of how I imagine those things traveling. And I think once awareness becomes more broad surrounding the federal CSA exemption, and we see more states drafting cannabis regulations or hemp regulations under the federal program, we're gonna hopefully see some movement on that. But until then, states. So under the Farm Bill, states have the authority to regulate hemp only to the extent granted by Congress, and they've said that basically they have three options. They can create a hemp, they can sign on to the hemp federal regulatory program, they can create their own state plan for approval, or they can opt out and not grow hemp, but they cannot make laws that interfere with interstate commerce in hemp and hemp extracts. So, there is that kind of federal preemption. I think it's an undeveloped area of the law, right? Like there's an argument to be made that federal law preempts state law, but it's just an undeveloped area of the law, and there's really no precedent at this point to say that a state can cannot prohibit hemp. And it's an ironic thing because I think you see a lot of states looking at states like Oregon, a lot of conservative states looking at states like Oregon and Colorado and saying, well, wait a minute, marijuana is federally illegal. So if these states who are legalizing marijuana are going against federal law, who's to say that we can't make hemp illegal even though it's legal, right? So I think they're kind of using that argument on the flip side to say, we want to stop these things. So, this is going to be a battle, is the point. Anybody else? Yeah.
You said that topicals are treated differently. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think that there's drugs, there's food and dietary supplements and topicals, and I would rank that in the order of like the priority of drugs probably higher than food, and but just I think that the risk of adverse reactions from like an ingestible product that might contain either, let's say, maybe it contains levels of THC that would cause intoxication, or let's say it contains heavy metals or other contaminants that are not tested for, and that could cause somebody to be sick. I think that the risk of that is just lower when we're talking about topical applications, and we just haven't seen much. The warning letters haven't really addressed the topical stuff. You still can't make health claims about topical products, but I just think in the pantheon of the priorities of FDA, they're just lower on that list.
Do you ever see it going to where it's illegal
That's a possibility. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say the reason why topicals are considered less risky and they have a different approval process. If the FDA were approving studies for things that were generally regarded as safe, which is the process for food and drugs or food and supplements, there's a similar process for topicals, but it's less stringent. They're not certifying any of those at all because of the Epidiolex, because they're very strictly saying we are not going to discourage the innovation of drugs by allowing CBD products into the market. There's already a drug on the market, and we're not going to say that CBD is legal.
Previous precedent that's
Yeah, so the only thing that I have heard that could change is in the dosage. The FDA is thinking like, okay, well, we're not going to say CBD products are totally illegal because that invalidates the innovation of drugs, but we could say at this certain dosage, it's not the same as Epidiolex, and so those would be allowed. But I think the dosage is very small.
I'll do one more question because we're not out of time.
Can you speak to FDA approval for Cannabis?
Sorry, sis?
For Cannabis, so it's by GW as well, but it is a one-to-one. But coming from New Zealand, so this is Cannabis and Epidiolex are the only two ministerial approved products for distribution at the moment.
I'm not aware of that one. I'll have to, and as an expert, I feel embarrassed about that, but as a quote-unquote expert.
You focused on hemp, so you're exempt.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to, so this is where we get back to like this concept of just there's a lot of money behind these big pharmaceutical companies, and their interest is to get as many patents and drugs approved as they can, and once those are FDA controlled and this is decided that this is the way that CBD is going to be regulated, then they're going to want to try and shut off the open market and that they'll have price controls over their prescription drugs and things like that. So I think if it's tough because it's a positive thing. It's the same thing as the rescheduling of CBD to Schedule 5. It's like a double-edged sword. It's okay, these things are getting approved, but it's something that should basically be available to the public. And so I don't know. I don't know how positive I feel about the continued approval of some of the large pharmaceutical drugs. And just one final point is that the one of the big spaces that's opening up right now is the pet supplement industry. So people are starting putting CBD into pet treats and things like that. The FDA Act applies equally to veterinary drugs and food for dogs and pets as it does to human applications. So that's just something to consider as well.
Thank you.
All right, round of applause for Henry. So I want to just say a couple things before we close out. We started a little late. We're going to end a little late. I'm not known for being on time, so here we go. These lawyers are awesome, and if any one of y'all went to go and talk to one of these lawyers, it would take a lot of money out of your pocket. And part of what I think is really missing, and part of what we learned at Open Cannabis Project has really been missing from this conversation, is bringing lawyers and breeders together, lawyers and breeders and growers together. I had a grower tell me once, the last time I talked to a lawyer, he was telling me to shut up because I got busted. There is an association between law and law enforcement. And the truth is that the legal community in cannabis is amazing. Everyone that spoke today is amazing. I love Kamran's idea that lawyers should be educators. I think that that's true. And so, if this is something you'd like to see more of, please let us know at Open Cannabis Project. And Beth at opencannabisproject.org, at least for the next 15 days or so. And then, there'll be some different email addresses. To that end, Open Cannabis Project has a survey up right now. If you are interested in seeing more programming similar to this, please let us know. We are currently organizing and working with a lot of other organizations to figure out what happens next with some of the work that we've been doing. Douglas Butler has been our main developer. attorneys in the back. We've built all this technology. It can live on if people want it to. So, and with that, I would love for all of our speakers to stand up, come up here if you can. Let's give them one final round of applause. Thank you. And thank you very much to the Cultivation Classic and to all of you. May we have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.